Welcome to the Couple to Couple League PeakDay podcast, where we talk about fertility and natural family planning with our friends. Today's guest is Julie McKay. Julie's interest in women's health began after she learned about the benefits of women charting their cycles. She then trained as a fertility care practitioner, teaching women to track biomarkers, to chart their cycles, and gain insight into the workings of their bodies with the Creighton model system. Her involvement in grief work began when she realized that her own experience of miscarriage did not prepare her to support her NFP clients through their losses. She sought out more training and eventually went on to become a Haven-trained bereavement doula. Julie currently works as the creative director of Haven Bereavement Doulas, an organization that offers research-driven training for doulas and other support people so they can become more grief-informed to support families through miscarriage, stillbirth, and infant loss. Julie lives with her son and her husband in Michigan. Welcome to the PeakDay podcast, Julie.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm so happy. And this is it's an interesting ministry that you have. I was so interested to have you on. I think we had some of the Couple to Couple League coaches take a class from you. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, I was really excited to see one of your coworkers had just emailed some of the Couple to Couple League instructors, and they signed up for the training. It was really cool to see. It's really unique, I think, to Couple League that you have couples teaching other couples. So I'm just really excited that they'll be able to support the clients they have.
Right. Julie, when did you become aware of charting cycles?
Yeah, that's a really good question. During college, I attended a talk about charting cycles, natural family planning. It was by the NFP coordinator for the diocese that I was living in at the time. And I tried to think back as to like why I was actually at this talk. I was trying to think like, how did I actually end up at this talk? And I honestly can't remember. I must have just been curious or something like that. And man, as soon as I learned about charting cycles, I was just interested in learning more. I had never heard this information before. I had known from my own cycles that something was off, and I had tried to talk to my medical providers, but no one had listened to me at the time. They had just suggested birth control for one of the issues I was experiencing and told me just not to worry about my irregular cycles until I was ready to get pregnant in the future.
Wow. Okay, so you just kind of suffered through the things that were happening to you every month, basically. Oh.
Yeah. And I just didn't know what was normal either. I think that was part of it too, that this talk helped me to know like, oh, here are some things I can actually look for, and here's a little bit of an idea of what could be normal and what's not normal.
So when you were preparing for marriage, was this something that was brought up as well? Did you have to take a course, or was it recommended?
I actually took an introduction to the Creighton model system. That was the first method that I learned. I took that and like had learned to chart with the method before I was even engaged.
Okay. And then, so your husband was, did you kind of introduce it to him, or what was that? What did that look like?
Yeah, we had some talks about like, this is what we're going to use when we're married. And then I met with my Creighton instructor and we kind of got him up to speed.
Okay. So you said before you were even engaged, you had already become an instructor. What was it your personal fertility awareness and health that prompted you to do that?
Yeah, I think when I learn something and I get really excited about it, I just want to share it with other people. Like I really like educating and teaching, and I'm married to a teacher as well. It's just something that we both enjoy doing. So when I learned about all this information about cycles and charting, and like realized like, wow, so many people don't know this, which has been my experience when I was teaching Creighton. A lot of people would say like, I'm just so sad I didn't know this information before. Or I would ask them like, what's, like the average length of your cycles, like shortest to longest, give me a range. And they would tell me how long their period was. Because they just didn't know what all happens during a cycle. So since I knew like, this is information I really want to share with others, I really enjoy teaching. I studied biology in college. I wanted to combine all of those interests with my faith to be able to just share the information with others. And my diocese also, they had a scholarship program that they would help with the cost of the training, pay for the training for new
Okay.
instructors. So
All right.
that
All
just kind
right.
of opened the door.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right. So you're married and you and your husband experience a miscarriage.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what what was that like for you? And did you have any like go-to resources? Were you able to find help and healing?
Yeah. Yeah, a really good question. There's just two things I want to highlight before I like really dive into like the resources, like practical side.
Sure.
Um, yeah, that just every person is different. So I'm going to share some of the things that worked, that helped me. But I just want to make sure that people who are listening, if they've had a loss themselves or supporting somebody else, just know that every person is different and they'll have their own support needs.
Right. Sure.
Um, yeah. And just like thinking about the word healing, it's such a common word. I hear it so much in loss spaces, but sometimes healing can kind of imply that there's an endpoint to grief or that we just become like the same person we were before we had a loss.
Okay.
And it's a little more complex than that because luckily, grief doesn't stay as strong as it was in the immediate aftermath of a loss. It
Mm-hmm.
does change. It does sort of go through these like phases of being less
Mm-hmm.
strong and then a little bit stronger, just depending on where we're at.
Right.
There's this really beautiful model of grief that's called the proximate grief model.
Mm-hmm.
And it was created by Dr. Abby Jorgensen, and it's in her book, A Catholic Guide to Miscarriage, Stillbirth, and Infant Loss.
Mm-hmm.
And it just refers to how close of contact mourners are in with their grief. So sometimes, so when they're in proximate grief, we're in closer contact with our grief.
Okay.
And I found this so helpful. Like I have personally thought of my grief as this sort of like blob. It's like this circle. And sometimes it's really big and it's right here in my face and it's really close. And
Mm-hmm.
then sometimes it's far away and it feels really small.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that is just helpful to sort of think about it, that sometimes like when there's an anniversary of a loss, anniversary of a due date, holidays, things like that, it can be a little bit stronger. But
Okay.
it just changes shape over time and it never fully goes away.
Mm-hmm.
So to actually share some resources that helped me,
Yeah.
I think more than anything, it's been supportive people around me.
Mm-hmm.
I've had two losses, and with the second loss, I sort of had a sense of who would be those supportive people, the people who had, not made negative comments when I've shared, not made minimizing comments. So I know that those people were the people that I could share the news of a pregnancy with really early. So in the case of a loss, they would be there to support
Right.
me
Right.
because it can be kind of hard to share
Mm-hmm.
about a pregnancy and then about a loss at the
Yeah.
same time. So
Yeah.
since they already knew, they could really easily join my support team when I
Mm-hmm.
had a loss.
Okay.
There's also a beautiful ministry out of the Diocese of Fort Wayne in South Bend, Indiana. It's called Ava's Grace, and they have a retreat that they do. And my husband and I both went on the retreat. It's for couples. I really love resources that are
Oh.
for both members of the couple.
Oh.
And they had
Sure.
just a lot of beautiful time in prayer. And that was just really beautiful. So if anyone wants to check that out, I think they also have a virtual support group. So no matter where people are located, they could join that.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. And then the book that I had mentioned earlier, A Catholic Guide to Miscarriage, Stillbirth, and Infant Loss,
Yeah.
by Abby Jorgensen, has really helpful resources. It wasn't published when I had my first miscarriage, but I remember reading it in between the time of my two losses. And I was just thinking like, man, this is what I really needed
Yeah.
when I had my first loss. It has information for lost families and then also support people as well.
Mm-hmm.
And just, it's really beautiful that it brings in the Catholic faith and, how that helps us, navigate grief after a loss.
Right. Right. So those are beautiful resources. Thank you for sharing those.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about perinatal loss.
Yeah.
What is it? There are different. I think you mentioned the three different kinds of perinatal loss, like when they occur, and then why do we hesitate so much to talk about it?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's define perinatal loss because that's a term we don't hear quite as much. So it just incorporates miscarriage, stillbirth, and then infant death. So I'll go through sort of like how common those are, and then we can sort of define them too.
Sure.
So in general, 1 in 4 clinically recognized pregnancies ends in loss. And it's important when we talk about clinically recognized that it means that the pregnancy need to be recognized by a medical provider. So the woman having the loss would have had to have had an ultrasound, a first prenatal appointment, something like that for it to be clinically recognized. So if she just takes a home pregnancy test, that wouldn't count in this statistic if she like hadn't seen her doctor yet. Right. And since, we're talking about NFP in this interview, I just want to highlight that a lot of people who use NFP take pregnancy tests earlier than their missed period because they know when they ovulated, they know they can test on the earlier side. So they're going to be picking up on more losses perhaps than other people would because they could pick up on really early losses where they get a positive pregnancy test and then they start bleeding shortly after that. So it's going to be more common than that 1 in 4 statistic that a lot of people are familiar with. Yeah. So miscarriage is the most common type of loss, and that's a loss before 20 weeks gestation in pregnancy. And then we have stillbirth. That's a loss after 20 weeks, so between 20 weeks and before birth. And 1 in 160 pregnancies in the United States ends in loss in a stillbirth. And then for infant loss or infant death, that is the death of an infant between birth and their first birthday. In the United States, that's 1 in 178 infants.
Wow. That sounds like a high number.
Yeah, it sounds really high when we talk about that. And I think sometimes when we see the stillbirth statistic compared to how common miscarriages are, sometimes we can feel like we don't need to provide as much support for those just because they are less common and we're a lot less likely just as individual people to know someone who's had a stillbirth versus someone who's had a miscarriage. I think most people, whether the person has, shared about their miscarriage or not, most people have met or, somebody in their family has had a miscarriage.
The follow-up question was, why do we hesitate to talk about it, or why do women not share about their losses?
Yeah. I think we hesitate to talk about it because we don't have a lot of just socialization and like just tools and like social scripts to talk about grief. It's just something, grief and death and loss is really uncomfortable to talk about in general. And then when we think of the loss of a little one, a baby, then it just becomes even harder to talk about. I think sometimes we just don't want to think about the depth of suffering that comes with that. And it can be hard to want to get close to that because just being with someone who's grieving, it changes us. We're different after supporting someone through that.
Right.
And then I think for like women, I think a lot of times people don't share about a loss. I think sometimes if they've waited to announce a pregnancy until 12 weeks, which is very common that people will wait that long because they want to see like, okay, is everything going to go okay? Then, like I said before, it can be hard to share about a loss if you haven't shared about the pregnancy because then you're announcing both of those things at the same time. I think that is really tricky. And then a lot of people, they just encounter negative comments, and a lot of comments, like they're just well-intentioned, but they can dismiss people's suffering or just make them feel like, wow, it wasn't really a loss. This person doesn't really recognize that. And I think that can make things hard as well.
Yeah. So why is it important for those who work with natural family planning couples or, in that kind of realm of healthcare, why is it important for them to be educated in grief-informed care, as you say?
Yeah. And grief-informed, that just means we're just acknowledging that everybody has grief and loss in their experience and their background. And then we just take that recognition of people's grief and loss, and then it translates into how we're caring for people. So in terms of those working in NFP, whether they're a medical provider or an NFP instructor, it's not a matter of if, but when they'll encounter someone who's had some type of perinatal loss in the past or while in their care. So we just need to think about how can we be prepared for these moments? Because it's so hard to know what to say, what not to say. And I think most people, they want to help. They really want to say the right thing.
Right.
But we don't have all of those tools just naturally at our disposal, just in society.
Right.
And sometimes people have their own history of perinatal loss when they are a medical provider or an instructor. And that can actually make it harder to support other people because we have our own experience and we can maybe project that on people. We can say like, oh, I really did this. I did this thing in response to my loss. And that's what other people want, what other people need. And sometimes it'll be true, and then sometimes it won't be true. So I think just working through that own experience and then just knowing like, how do I support people in general, I think can give us a lot of the tools to know what to say, to perhaps just, avoid just sharing potential solutions or things to try. Because that can be kind of tricky if we're sharing like, oh, we have so many tools at our disposal with NFP, with medical care. We have so many suggestions. We have so much knowledge that we want to share with people. But sometimes if we say like, oh, maybe you could have tried this or that, it can feel blaming. And sometimes people will think, man, if they're saying, if I had only tried this thing, my baby wouldn't have died. In a lot of cases, that's just not true. Like most losses are not preventable in any way. So we obviously don't want to be telling that to people. And that's not what people are actually trying to say, but that's just sometimes how it can come across.
How does an NFP instructor become trained in this kind of support, Julie?
Yeah. When I was first trying to seek out more education for working with my Creighton clients who had experienced loss, in the past or while they were charting with me, I couldn't find any trainings out there that were specifically for NFP instructors. I eventually took a training that was geared towards doulas and other birth professionals, and that was really helpful, but I was still left with a lot of questions as to how do I apply this to my work as an NFP instructor? How do I give my clients the instructions they need? How do I talk with them? What happens if I see they might have had a miscarriage and I can see that on their chart, but they're not aware of that? Like, what do I do in those situations? So I learned more. I read books, took more trainings. And now that I know more about grief work and supporting lost families, I created a course that's an hour long. I try to make it affordable because I just want to get this information out to people so that they can just have the tools they need. So it's called How to Respond to Pregnancy Loss as an NFP instructor. And it's on the Bereavement Doulas website. It's bereavementdoulas.com for Haven Bereavement Doulas under our trainings page. And it just talks about some of those things I've been talking about, like what to say, what not to say. What do we do when we're communicating with clients? How do we honor all of the children they have, whether they're living or not? Because we don't need to, as instructors, as medical providers, we can't fill every role. We're not therapists, we're not counselors, we're not bereavement doulas, but we can be a vital support, part of the support team for lost families. They just need all kinds of support on their team. And I think a lot of people who've had losses are really looking for this type of support, someone who can be really sensitive and compassionate when they share, hey, I've had a loss and, I just need someone to know that as part of my history when they're working with me.
Can you give us some helpful strategies for spouses or families or friends to walk with a woman through, either miscarriage or stillbirth or infant loss?
Yeah. And it's really important, when we're thinking about this, just to remember again that everyone has different support needs. So a big principle of grief work is that we need to allow the person who's mourning to teach us how to support them. And that, like we were just talking about, that everyone needs a support team. So just one person, whether it's, a husband or a friend or a sister, they can't be the sole support for somebody else. So they can help that person who is grieving find resources and find more support. They can just do a lot of those, like the digging, the looking up resources, find a bereavement doula, if that could be someone that would be helpful for their team, a therapist who has training in grief, and that's their specialization. They can help people find those resources, because sometimes they can be really hard to find. I've looked them up to compile a resource list as part of my training, and sometimes it takes a lot of digging and emailing people, calling people just to find really basic resources. So that's a really big way that people can help out. And if the person trying to support the mom who has lost her little one are also affected by the loss, so if it's that baby's dad or grandparent or aunt or uncle, they just need to remember that they need their own support team. They need to seek out support for themselves, and also just not make any demands for support or requests for support from someone who's closer to the loss, where the mom would be closest to the loss, the dad would be second closest to the loss. They just need to, if they're further from the loss, not make requests from people who are closer. They should be bringing support in to those people who are closer.
Okay.
And then I think when we want to offer support, a lot of times we can ask, how can I help? But it's hard for most people when someone's offering to help to be creative, and that's just more true for someone who's grieving. So we can offer options. So we could say, hey, I'm going to have some groceries delivered to your front door. What would be most helpful for me to send? Or we could just say, hey, I'm here to support you. Would you like me to drop off a meal, bring ice cream and just sit with you, or bring you groceries? We can just offer some options.
What about men, husbands? How do you have special advice for accompanying men through grief?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of times when we talk about supporting men, there can be a lot of conversation focusing on like men and women are different in how they grieve. And I think, if we look at like a group level, if we look at like all women and all men and we put them into two different groups, and then we looked at like what are the differences between them, I think we would find some differences. But I think those group differences don't tell us a lot about the individual person that's grieving, like that individual man who has lost his baby, like what he needs, because he's a unique person, and he might be really emotional, and we might think like men don't have emotions, but he might have a lot of emotions that are coming up. So we just need to think about like what he individually needs, and just get to know that person in front of us. But I think the really important thing to remember with dads is to remember that he also experienced the loss of a little one. Sometimes we focus so much on the mom, and I think, the mom should get the most support out of anybody. It's her body that went through labor, birth, the postpartum period. She's the one closest to the loss. She has the most intimate knowledge of her baby. So she deserves the most support, but we can't forget about the dads. We just had to ask, how are you? Like making sure to ask him too, and helping him find support, because I think it's a little bit harder to find resources specifically for the dads. They're definitely out there, but they can be a little more scarce and hard to find. So helping him track that information down can be really helpful. And just making sure that we tell him too, like, I'm so sorry for your loss, and just directing some of the support his way.
How do you support couples who have experienced a loss after maybe an unintended pregnancy?
Thinking about the couples, like NFP is quite effective, but there will be some couples where they are trying to avoid pregnancy and then they become pregnant unexpectedly. And I think there's just some special support needs that we need to think about for those families, because they might have felt really stressed about the pregnancy prior to the loss, just for medical, financial, emotional, physical reasons. They might have been like, this is really hard. I'm not sure how we're going to handle this. And some of those couples might feel relief after having a loss. And that can be a tricky feeling, because there can be some shame or guilt associated with just experiencing that emotion, because they might feel like, I didn't love my baby enough, or maybe think like, I didn't want this enough, and that's why I had this loss. And those things aren't true, because it makes so much sense why they would be feeling this emotion. And it's not all couples in this situation. Some couples at a certain point in pregnancy, they're just excited. And now they might be primarily sad. They're still going to have some mix of emotions, but maybe relief isn't in there.
Right.
But I think if we are working with them as their instructor or even just their friend, we can just remind them that there's no moral weight attached to simply feeling emotions. Right. So that just sort of can catch all. So no matter what they're feeling, because we all have a complicated mix of emotions with grief, it can just remind them that this is normal, this is okay, and there's nothing wrong with you for feeling what you're feeling.
Okay. Julie, can you talk about the return of fertility after a loss? What can that look like practically and emotionally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this answer can get a little complex because it can depend on how early the loss occurred and other circumstances surrounding the loss. So I'll give some general information, but people who are listening can just keep in mind that this will vary depending on each person's particular situation.
Okay.
And if someone has experienced a loss and they're thinking about this information, they can just know too that there's a wide range of normal. So I might give some averages, but there's a wide range of normal after a loss in terms of fertility. So if someone is ever unsure if what they particularly are experiencing is normal, it's a good time for them to check in with their medical provider and just ask those questions. But in general, for cycling to start to resume, the HCG levels need to drop below 5. That's a non-pregnant level, and it would have to get below that for fertility to start to resume. And like in all postpartum situations, ovulation can happen before the first period comes back. So it doesn't always happen. Sometimes the body has some sort of ovulatory event. Well, it'll try to ovulate. It might not quite get to fully releasing an egg, the full event of ovulation. There's some sort of ovulatory event that triggers the period. But it's important for couples to know that ovulation can happen before the first period, just so they can make a plan as to whether they want to try to avoid or try to achieve pregnancy. And when we're thinking about how early ovulation can return, it can return as early as 2 weeks after a loss. But it's also totally normal for it to take longer than that. That's just more of the early point. Right. And then a period will follow that ovulation and usually a normal amount of post-peak days, sometimes a little bit shorter, especially in that first cycle after a loss, a little bit shorter of the days after the peak day.
Okay.
And I think emotionally, it can be really tricky that there's this uncertainty, that there's all these ranges, like I'm saying, it could be this, it could be that. And that uncertainty is so hard because couples have already gone through so much. Right. And now they're waiting for cycling to resume. And no matter if they're trying to avoid or achieve pregnancy, there's a lot wrapped up in waiting for that peak day, waiting for the signs of fertility to come back. And that can just be so challenging emotionally. Yeah. And the first period too can be a really challenging time because there's bleeding. It can be heavier. It can be more painful than normal. Okay. And then there's that bleeding that can remind the woman of the bleeding that happened during her loss. So that can be a challenging time. And just that time after a loss, maybe about a month or so after a loss, is just a good time to check in on a friend, maybe a client, just someone who's had a loss, because that's around the time she might be having her period return. Okay. And you don't have to say I'm checking in on you because you might be having your period, but just knowing that could be a more difficult time can just be a time to draw in more support. Sure. And for couples who want to try to achieve pregnancy after a loss, which is not everybody, there's lots of good information on that on the Catholic Bereavement Doula website. We have a resources page, and it's called Fertility After a Loss. Okay. I've used this page myself for my own losses, and it has information about research out there about how long to wait or not wait when trying to achieve pregnancy after a loss. And it also has suggested questions that people can ask their medical provider, because sometimes the recommendations that medical providers are providing are they're thinking of like emotional reasons of like, you might not be ready. I'm going to wait. I'm going to tell you to wait a little bit. So I can help you clarify whether their recommendations are research-based or not.
And where would they find that resource, Julie?
It's called CatholicBereavementDoula.com, and then you do /resources, and then it's called Fertility After a Loss.
Okay, alrighty. How would practicing natural family planning give optimum chances for healthy fertility when you're trying to achieve a pregnancy?
So since we're talking a lot about perinatal loss in the interview, I just want to highlight, we were just talking about it, that some people, want to achieve pregnancy. Some people are trying to avoid pregnancy after a loss. So there's a lot that we just need to respect in terms of each couple's discernment. And I think when we're talking about loss, it's important to remember too that having a loss doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the woman's general health or even her fertility. So a lot of miscarriages are caused by random genetic mutations. 50 to 80% are caused by those random genetic mutations. And for those less biologically knowledgeable, a mutation, it's something that happens in the genes. And the random genetic mutations are just mutations that happen randomly just in the baby's genes. They're not hereditary. So it's not the parents passing down mutations. There are mutations that are happening in the little one's genes.
Okay.
So those losses are not preventable, and many losses are not preventable. So even having, very normal fertility, people will experience a loss. And I think for couples that don't have a lot of knowledge around fertility, NFP, when they're trying to achieve a pregnancy, can give them so much knowledge because they might think that they're fertile the whole cycle. They might just think, I can just get pregnant at any point in my cycle. There are people who think that because they just haven't been told anything different.
Right.
So it's such a gift for them to know their periods of fertility and infertility. Right. And if they have any concerns about their cycle or, seeing whatever they're seeing on their chart, then they will have greater access to providers who will listen to their concerns, take them seriously, be able to just read that information that they have on the chart.
Right. So not only are you a bereavement doula and a fertility care coach, you are part of the Catholic Nursing Mothers League. Can you tell us what that is? And you are a mentor for them?
Yeah, a mentor can provide just breastfeeding information, just really basic breastfeeding information, just from her own experience, from the experience of others, of course, in a de-identified way. Or there are resources like books that the Catholic Nursing Mother League will point mentors to in their training, so they can share information from those as well. Okay. And some mentors will lead groups, maybe at their church or something like that. That's not something I'm currently doing, but there is an online group that the Catholic Nursing Mother Leagues hosts if anyone's looking for support, if they're pregnant or breastfeeding. And for me right now, being a mentor means that I can just try to support my friends and just the women around me who are breastfeeding, just in really small ways. Just, if they're asking for advice, just sending them some helpful, accurate, reliable information, and just offering encouragement.
All right, Julie, thank you so much. How can people get a hold of these bereavement resources, and maybe if they're an NFP instructor or somebody, in that field, how could they learn more about being more grief informed?
Yeah, a really good place for them to check out would be the Haven Bereavement Doulas website. So that's bereavementdoulas.com. And we're actually going to be getting a new website soon. It'll be the same URL, so they'll be able to go to the same place, but it'll just make all of the information more accessible and easy to find. So there's blog posts. I think a lot of those will apply to people who are working in natural family planning. Okay. And we also have skill sessions for people who join our newsletter. They can watch those skill sessions live. We do them once a quarter. So we've talked about things like how to decompress after a difficult conversation with clients. And we had a therapist that came and talked with us about that. So I think a lot of those would be helpful for instructors, maybe medical providers as well. And those are some free resources. And the course I mentioned is on there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Julie, for being on the PeakDay podcast.
Yes, I was really happy to be here.